ongoing horrors having to do with the Roman Catholic Church and all manner of, more. It's amazing to me that, 8 years ago when it was me and Ashley on the program, and the whole scandal was breaking, and with the priests and the thousands and thousands and thousands of molested children, and here we are in 2010.
Still talking about it.
And it's still going on.
Yeah.
And you still have the Pope making excuses. This thing that just, he was quoted today in the news. Here's what old Ratzinger had to say about all of this. Apparently, we're the ones with the problem. So if it weren't for the fact that all of these pesky non-Catholics were bringing this stuff up, right? I mean, It's our problem for calling them out on it. Right. If we would just shut up about all of this and let them go molest kids in peace, there wouldn't be a big public stink about everything that's happening. What the Pope thinks about this is his quote, "From God comes the courage not to be intimidated by petty gossip." Now, I want you all to think about what he just said right there. Petty gossip. How many thousands of children were sexually molested over the years by Catholic priests? How many times did Ratzinger, is it known that Ratzinger shielded these guys, protected them from the law, protected them from prosecution?
Moved them to different parishes.
Moved them around.
Yeah, without warning parishioners what was happening. Yeah, that to me I think is the worst part of it.
And this is petty? The Pope thinks this is petty. Right? If you've read Hitchens, and you know Hitchens' famous quote about how religion poisons everything, this is about as good an example of that as you can possibly find. What religion does is it enables and facilitates atrocities in this way. God, when the Pope says, "From God comes the courage not to be intimidated by petty gossip," what he's saying is, God allows arrogant evil men like me to claim that we are above ethical or moral standards of any kind. That's what religion allows. Religion doesn't provide a moral compass to people. What religion does is it hands you a hammer to smash your moral compass with. You can justify anything because you can say, "Well, God, I'm cool with God, so I really don't care what you think." God, of course, in pretty much all cases, being the idealized, projected self-image of the believer onto the universe.
Correct.
That's basically what God is. So, I'm sorry, Ratzo, but what you are is a criminal. Okay. You should be arrested, you should be prosecuted, you should be thrown in jail to have a little bit, maybe of some of this pettiness come your way. And as far as the Roman Catholic Church, I think it's a criminal syndicate, and it ought to be shut down completely, and turn the Sistine Chapel into an art museum, and just get rid of these guys, because you're done. You're done. Okay? You've screwed up Western civilization for several centuries. We're done. Just go away. Please, Catholic Church, just go away. Just stop.
Okay.
Oh, that felt good. I enjoyed that. Yay. But what else were we going to... You and I, before the show, we were talking about just various things that we've been...
Well, before we go into something else, I just want to say this reminded me of something that I didn't think about when we were talking pre-show. I did watch one of the great debates with, I think it was Hitchens and another gentleman, and I apologize, I can't remember his name, and then there were two leaders, Catholic leaders, and they were talking about, is the church a force for good in the world, I think was the label of it. Yeah. And I remember... That
didn't work out too well for them, did it?
No, it didn't. But when Hitchens got up, of course, one of the main things that he hit was the no condom policy in AIDS-ravaged Africa, where there's a huge mission there.
Not only that, but the Pope going there and claiming that condoms would actually spread AIDS more.
Right, it was horrendous. But I do remember that there was a gentleman and a woman that were representing the Catholic Church, and when the woman got up, she said something similar to what you just read as far as that quote, which was, I knew when someone got up there that they were going to bring up this condom and AIDS in Africa thing. And it was one of the two gentlemen, either Hitchens or his partner, when they got up, said, it's sort of like somebody who's in jail for theft, getting before having a lawyer come up and say, well, I knew somebody was going to bring up this, prior record.
All your crimes I did, yeah.
And it's interesting that that a person can look at this horrible harm that's being done due to a direct doctrinal preaching, and then turn around and say, I can't believe people are going to call us on this. And in this case,
because they think they're above it.
Right. Now, in this case, it's a little different because I understand that that's not like a doctrinal directive to molest children, as opposed to the condom issue, which really is a doctrinal directive. It's a direct harm caused as a result of Orthodox doctrine.
Yeah, but it's a kind of rationalization.
Right. But
my new tongue.
The idea that there's something wrong with being critical of it.
Yeah, the whole rationalizations kick in about, well, we can do whatever we want because...
How can you not expect criticism for something that causes so much harm? I mean, you need to expect that kind of criticism.
If you don't like being called out on the things you do, don't do them.
Right.
I mean, you'd think that would be a basic principle?
Or at least show some level of understanding for why people would be critical of something that you've done when it causes harm.
Yeah, I mean... a little bit of contrition, even a tiny bit.
Or I would even say compassion.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, for me and you, we're looking at this and we're not even involved. But imagine your feelings if you had been molested. How aggravating that quote would be.
Yeah, so it's aggravating is a mild way to put it. But
I mean, to me, that kind of slap in the face.
Well, it's a dismissal.
A victimized child.
It's a complete dismissal of a traumatic event that literally screws people up for life. I mean, psychologically, you don't get over that kind of thing. And the Pope's just like, meh.
Petty, what do you call it? Petty?
Petty gossip.
Gossip, gossip.
Gossip, it's gossip. No, gossip is talking about who, Mary Kay, whatever, the twins, whoever they're banging this week. That's gossip, okay? You guys banging little kids ain't gossip, it's crime.
Yeah.
Gossip, crime. Big distinction. Right, wow. Well, speaking of lame rhetorical justifications for things,
right.
we get emails, and a lot of our emails are from fans, and we're happy to hear from you. Hi back. We love you guys. And some of our emails are from theists who want to wag their finger at us, or maybe hit us with some new argument that we don't think, that they don't think we've heard before. And sometimes we get quite a lot of emails from atheists who are themselves engaged in discussions with theists, and they're sort of like, well, how do I reply to that one? And then sometimes they'll go on to give us the examples of whatever it is, whatever apologetics they're hearing. And I don't know about you, Trace, but I would suspect that you would agree. I've never heard any real exercise in apologetics that to some degree, or to a very great degree, didn't just involve making a bunch of stuff up, asserting the things that you make up as factual, not feeling that you have to back them up, and then declaring that you've scored a point or a big argumentative victory.
Yeah, you pretty much have to make things up because you're talking about things that are, by definition, not examinable or verifiable.
Right. And you were talking about earlier, you were dealing with, someone emailed us about problem of evil.
Correct.
And then I had a guy that I was going to respond to. But first off, what came before the whole, we were, talking about the child molestation thing.
Right.
That always tends to, because that's the most abominable act, I think, across the board that people can sort of bring up whenever you want to talk about evil. But we got an email from a theist, and what all did he say about that? Because
that actually was not a discussion I was involved in, but in watching the discussion on the list, it just reminded me of so many past discussions on Problem of Evil. And I know we've done a show, I think it was Russell who did the show on Problem of Evil, so I don't want to rehash that, but basically the idea is that since bad things happen to innocent people, and by innocent I would say, let's even say an infant, or good people, or people who don't seem to deserve the horrible things that happen to them, however you want to define it, things happen that aren't good all the time, and when that occurs, and you have, the idea of if someone has a model of a God that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, you have to ask yourself, how does evil get through the filter? So, is it that God could stop it and doesn't, and chooses not to, or is it that he would stop it but can't? And I think the thing that stuns me is how many people write to us in order to say, I have a response to Problem of Evil, and then their rebuttal entails either God being unable to stop it and wanting to, or God being able to stop it but not willing to.
Yeah.
So their rebuttal to Problem of Evil generally becomes just simply an explanation for why God is willing to allow evil, or how come God can't stop evil.
Right.
And then they say that's the rebuttal.
Admitting that there is a problem does not constitute
It's like,
rebutting
yes,
a problem.
we understand that it's either allowed or
yes, you're right.
or can't be stopped.
God lets all this stuff happen, you betcha.
And one of
He has his reasons that we don't get because of our puny human intellect.
One of the ones that comes up most often is God wants to allow free will. And I think we were talking before on the idea that it doesn't always involve will. We had an incident here in Austin, and I almost feel guilty picking on it because my sympathies go out to the family. I don't want to use this as necessarily, I feel bad using this incident, even bringing it up, but I want to just say that, I'm sympathetic to everybody involved in this. But there was an unfortunate incident that happened here not long ago where someone drove to work and they forgot they had their child in the back of the car. And here in Texas during the summer, it gets extremely hot extremely quickly. You cannot leave animals or infants in your vehicle. Even with the windows cracked, it doesn't help. And you would think, like, oh, that's unfortunate. You think you know where this is going, but you don't, because what happened is somebody saw the child in the car, reported it to security, and said there's a baby in a car, and the car's locked, and it's shut up, and there's nobody there. And security apparently was unable to find this vehicle. The woman had left, and the child died. So in this case, this didn't involve a conflict of free will
at any point.
with something bad happening. This was simply someone who did not will their own child to die, who simply forgot. It was just a brain hiccup, forgot something extremely important.
And we'll set aside the whole issue of how a parent can be stupid enough to forget your child.
He's not the first person to have done this. It can happen. It was not a purposeful thing. It was not. He wasn't intending to harm his child. And then what happens is you have a bystander who sees this. She does the right thing and reports this. Then you have security that goes out looking. They don't find this. And at any point in this, there could have been a reasonable save of this child without anybody batting an eye or thinking that it was divine intervention, no show of the hand of God, no violations of physical reality. And it could have just been that the person reported it, security, she brought them to the car, and they found the kid was saved.
Yeah.
So these things happen, and it's not always in conflict with free will. But even when it is, it gets a little hairy, because what happens is they'll say, well, God allows evil because he wants people to be able to do evil. And so they're talking specifically about evil perpetrated on other people by people who intend harm. So we usually ramp it right up to child rape. And the reason we go there is because this is something that is egregious to most people's minds. And so it becomes the perfect model of what to use to say, okay, we all agree this is not good. So, okay, child rape. And then the response that is most shocking is when people say, well, God wants people to be able to act on their free will, even though he doesn't always like what they do. And the example that I gave was if I open the door of a room and I see a child about to be raped by someone, and I close the door and back out and do nothing, and then someone finds out about that and they confront me, they would think that I was monstrous. And if I were to say, no, believe me, nobody thinks this is more heinous than I do, but the fact is, I don't want to impede the free will and free action of this rapist, because to me, that's a higher priority than this child's welfare and safety. I can't imagine any person not thinking that I was completely inexcusable, like in my action and my explanation. It would be completely non-acceptable to any compassionate human being. And yet, they use this as their model of God, to say that God prefers to protect the will and action of really wicked people instead of defending the helpless. And that in that case, what I have to say is what you're saying is that God is able to intervene but doesn't. So this is unwilling to stop evil, which the problem of evil says, yes, your God is either going to be unwilling to stop this evil or he's going to be unable. And when someone says unable, what we get with the unable is usually they'll say something is required. So they'll say either free will is a requirement of some sort in order to achieve some ends. And what you're saying in that case is that there's not some other way to do this without child rape being a part of this universe. So in other words, God set up this universe in such a way that he's going to let people do what they want to do.
Including that.
Yeah, including child rape. And then he's going to sort this out later, however he's going to sort it out. But the fact is, there could be a universe where there isn't child rape, and where people still have free will. And usually, I think it was Jeff who brought up to the person that, do you think there's free will in heaven, and is there child rape in heaven? And normally, everybody will say, yes, you have free will in heaven, and no, there's not child rape. And so it's like, okay, well, then you acknowledge that there is such a universe as one that doesn't restrict your free will and doesn't allow for child rape, and yet this is not the universe that we live in, so what gives? And I just want to kind of point out that if you're going to respond to problem of evil, you're going to have to come up with something different, because both those scenarios hit on either God is unwilling or God is unable to stop, what would be considered evil under the POE.
Yeah, and another reason why the appeal to free will fails so phenomenally as a response to the POE is that it fails to make the fundamental distinction between free will and action.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, free
some
will.
Some people don't separate them. I do.
Yeah, well, I think you should, because free will simply implies the ability to make a decision about something, or the ability to want to do something.
Correct.
Or to have a certain viewpoint or mode of thought.
Right.
And but it has nothing to do with the ability to act. I imagine that there are millions of paraplegics in the world who want to be able to walk and run and swim and jump and play and do stuff. I mean, that their free will is saying, damn, I wish I could move and get up out of my wheelchair. But that physically they cannot. Okay, so has their free will been impeded? Well, no, it hasn't. Okay, their ability to act has, because they have a physical disability.
Yeah.
But they can want all they want.
Mentally they're not robots. Right. They're not stripped of free thought.
And that's the problem when apologists will say, well, but if God interfered, then we'd be automatons and we would not. But no, not really. It's a wonderful response. I think it might have been Jeff some years ago when we were doing the show was, for example, if God were to save a child or to save a person miraculously from some impending disaster, et cetera, well, you'd just be God's robot. And it's just like, okay, so if you fell off a pier and I jumped in and saved your life, that means you're my robot, right? Okay, you have to do everything.
Yeah.
So it's funny the ducking and the dodging and the weaving. I've not heard, but of course all of these claims are things that they just cannot verify. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's all a matter of just sort of rhetorical CYA.
Right. When you say that free will is important to God, basically you can't know that.
Right.
You can't know that. And I can't verify it. So when someone tells me God does this because he values the free will of a child rapist and the free action of a child rapist more than the welfare of a child, my response to that is I can't go ask God if he agrees with what you're saying about him, or her, or it. So I have no way to verify what you just said. And so for me, on my end, it's like you just made this up. Because there's no way I can verify it, and frankly, I don't know how you could verify it.
And doesn't the victim have free will, right? So if God is not intervening, and where you have both a victimizer and a victim, both of whom have free will, but the victimizer's got the upper hand.
Well, his free action is important.
Yes,
but the child's free action obviously is not.
Precisely. But when you have these people failing to make this distinction between action and will,
right.
then you're essentially saying, okay, well then why is it exactly you want me to worship the patron god of child rapists? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it is a little weird. And there was one thing I wanted to hit real quickly before we go on, and this was just sort of a hat tip to someone that wrote to us. A young man wrote to us, and he's got a YouTube channel. He's a disabled person who... from visually, when you see him in the videos, you can tell that he's disabled. And he wrote in and he had a statement that was sort of ambiguous, but when he clarified it, I understood immediately what he was saying. He was describing a trend that he saw when he argued with theists, and he felt that his disability was being sort of used in an unfair way against him. And we were like, well, what do you mean by that? And what he described, weirdly, was familiar to me, even though I had never heard this used against a disabled person before, and it was appalling. But what he said is that because he's disabled, theists tend to simply dismiss that he could possibly have anything reasonable or intelligent to say regarding this debate of the existence or non-existence of God, because clearly he's angry at God because he's disabled. So therefore, it's fair to dismiss anything he would have to say or think on this issue, which it's disgusting.
And it's your basic ad hominem.
Yeah, and
because you are X, your point of view can be discounted.
Well, what I wrote him back to say was that he's the first disabled person I've heard being hit with this, but I've heard other people hit with this, and ironically, it's people who were molested as children by church leaders. And if you're molested by a church leader as a child, I've seen letters on our list where people write in and say, I do everything I can to hide this because the moment it comes out, nobody believes I have anything of substance to say on this issue, and everything I say will be discounted because they're going to say I'm angry at God. And it doesn't matter that I have reasons for why I don't believe. It's like suddenly these people simply do not count in this debate. And I'm like, that must be so frustrating. It would be, for me as a woman, it would be like somebody every time I get upset saying, oh, you must be PMSing. It's like, I just couldn't possibly just be upset about something. It has to be PMS
typical
week.
hysterical female.
So,
that's just you all over, right?
And
Tracie?
that just couldn't, I mean, to me, the idea that somebody would use that against a person who's disabled or a person who's been molested as a child and just say, I'm going to use this as my excuse why I don't even have to hear you. You have no voice because nothing you can say could possibly matter.
Right.
Is insult to injury.
Yeah, it's extremely cold. But again, it provides the convenient out for the apologist who can't really just, yes, well.
All I can say is that, before you write somebody off like that, at least give their arguments a listen and make sure that you can demonstrate that they are utilizing that they are in some way angry at God and expressing that anger at God and not giving you a decent argument, because you at least owe them to listen to what it is they have to say and to then make a judgment about whether or not your prejudice about them not being able to give you a decent argument is valid. So you at least have to give them a hearing, just like you would any other person who's not disabled or molested. I feel sad that I have to even say that. I know it's a real shame, but that is again one of these rhetorical little tricks that they pull to sort of kind of weasel out of. Well, here's the odd thing. I had written to a friend of mine. I said, what's most interesting is that we often hear Christians ask, "What happened to make you stop believing in or hate God?" And ironically, we spend a lot of time dispelling this rumor by explaining it's not about a bad emotional experience. Really, the idea just doesn't make sense to us. But on the flip side, we get a lot of mail from Christians who get upset when we point out their personal subjective emotional experience they had when they were 16 doesn't count as a rational reason or evidence that their belief in God is correct. So they do this very thing, and then they turn around and say, oh, you're doing this. And it's like, no, you're doing this. On the one hand, it's almost hypocritical that they accuse atheists of doing what they turn right around and do. On the other hand, it makes perfect sense to project. If this is how I think, this must be how you're thinking. Well, they extol the emotional aspect of conversion as a great virtue and a benefit and why it's so wonderful. And how but why is it that their emotional experience validates their God? But if someone were to, I'm not saying precisely, but if someone had a negative emotional experience and they say because of this there is no God, wouldn't that be just as valid? Emotional reasons for belief are okay. Emotional reasons for disbelief are not even if they really were the reasons. Yeah. Suddenly are not valid. Right. Right. I mean, to me, if somebody says, well, I had this positive emotional experience, and that, to me, demonstrates I know there is a God, then it should be valid for somebody to say, well, I had a really bad experience in church when I was a kid, and it turned me off, and that, to me, means I know there is no God. And if you're going to use your emotional experience as evidence of God, then somebody's negative emotional experience should be evidence there is no God. I think it's both ridiculous, but you can't accept one and reject the other. On what grounds would you do that? And Christians find it really baffling when I tell them that I have nothing really but positive memories of growing up in the church that we went to in Houston when I was an adolescent. Yeah. And I have a lot I have memories of those days. Yeah. Wow, I was involved. Because the fun that I might have had going to sleep with the lock-ins at the church rec room or camp or whatever we did, or little socials with all that's got nothing to do with the question of whether or not any of this is true. Right. Right. Whether or not the fundamental question of does a God exist is entirely separate.